Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Alien vs. Predator Galaxy podcast. This is Aaron Percival, aka Corporal Hicks, and joining me, as always, is my favorite rock enthusiast.
Adam Zeller, aka RidgeTop.
That took you a moment there. It's a Fifield reference.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Well, how was I going to instantly get that when I'm waking up and still
well,
sipping my energy drink here?
waking up any fucking excuse. And joining us today are two very special guest hosts. First up, if you have listened to Perfect Organism in the past, you will be very familiar with his voice. And if you've listened to us in the past, he has guest starred on several book and comic related episodes. It is Mr. Christian Matzke. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming back. And last, but by no means least, one of my favorite human beings on this planet. They always get a big fucking,
Ah,
I'm trying to think of the right word here. A big up from me whenever we get to talk about you in any capacity at all. I will just big you up something constant.
oh, I love you too.
Welcome, Alex White, back to the show.
Thank you, thank you. I think Christian, you should just take the nickname Big Chap. You are a big chap.
Well, that has another meaning in England that I don't really know.
Oh no.
You must know that.
It wouldn't go quite. I feel like you're going phallic here, Christian, and then
That's where the name comes from. That's what the crew in 1978. That's what they were joking about when they
I
called it
did
Big Chap.
not know that.
Come
That's interesting.
Oh, look at this. I
See,
learned something new. I'd been
I've never
naming
known
it.
it to be. I've
My
never
job
known
is
it to
done.
be a phallic thing. A chap is just a person, a big bloke over here.
All right.
Listen to
In-
him. He's got the accent.
But also, if Alex White wants to give me a nickname, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Ooh,
Thank you
yes,
kindly.
yes. I
Yeah.
just remember meeting you for the first time, and I was like, that is a tall man.
Yeah, we all got dinner last summer at Comic-Con, and that was just
Yes.
really fun night. So that
Oh,
was
except for
great.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Aaron wasn't there.
Oh, right, yeah, because Aaron still hasn't made it to the States. One of these days.
Well, it's not my fault. It costs a fortune to leave this shitty little island and go elsewhere to your shitty big continent instead.
We're off to a great start.
Why are we here? What are we doing?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
are here to talk about whether you love it or not. It is still, in my opinion, the biggest contribution to the alien lore in over a decade, in my humble opinion. I don't think it's wholly original to alien lore, because it functionally performs the same as an older thing in some ways, which I'm sure we can talk about, as we go forward. But we are here to talk about Adam. Is Adam's very favorite.
You already got me bad with the word choice of contribution.
Okay, if not contribution, what, Adam?
I guess forced addition, maybe.
Oh
There
my.
we go.
The fucking professionalism on show
Sorry,
here.
guys.
I know, I know.
Muted.
So you're leaving us hanging there. Is it the black goo?
It is by all means the black goo, aka the accelerant, aka the xenovirus, aka agent / chemical, blah blah blah, numeric, alphanumeric designation that I will never fucking remember in my life.
Wait, I brought it up. Chemical A0-3959X.91-15.
That's not hard to remember. Rolls
Also-
off the tongue.
Also known as agent in the RPG instead of chemical.
Or the pathogen.
Or the pathogen, yes.
Hmm.
That's,
The pathogen is nice because it's not giving it a bacterial or viral nature. And one of the things that I thought was, okay, gosh, I could just go straight into it. Do we just go straight into
just
it?
Yeah,
go
go
straight
for it.
into
Okay, so one of the things, as I was working on Cold Forge, Prometheus had already come out. Covenant had not yet come out, and I was trying to figure out exactly what Dr. Marsalis's project was actually doing to use this thing for health reasons as opposed to weapon reasons, right? And so I was looking at some of the literature. It talked about people going septic with it, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. That would be a bacterial blood infection, not a viral infection, for example." Um, and so the question then became, you know, what could it what could it actually be? And the idea of an extremophilic bacterium or a bacteriophage or an archaean got to be really interesting to me. And I consulted with Lolly Garcia, who was my biology consultant on both books, and we talked about how the biggest problem inside of the franchise was not biologically. The biggest problem inside the franchise is the sudden gain of biomass of the xenomorph, and what we landed on was if it was an extremophilic bacterium like Cupravidius metallodurans or something that like eats metal, um, then it could be eating parts of the ship. It could be like gleaning stuff off the ship as it moves through it. It could, all that other stuff. And so, coupled between that and the fact that when I went back and I watched the original and I was looking at Kane's X-ray, it doesn't show a larva. Nobody ever sees a chest burster until the chest burster is fully assembled.
Although you can catch a chicken embryo when Ash is looking at some of the screens.
Oh yeah, but
And
is that
that's apparently a Dan O'Bannon reference. Apparently Dan liked chicken embryos. I think
oh,
Diane confirmed it at some point on Facebook.
was it already though? Was it already implanted at that point?
But I don't know if it's supposed to be the chest burster or anything. But
Right.
you can unequivocally see a chicken embryo on one of the screens.
Oh, that's interesting. And so, for me, it became sort of a simple life cycle, right? That you get an injection of, the goo. It fuses with your body and it starts eating your body and unzipping your DNA and using cellular components to assemble itself out of you. Because if it was a chest burster that was like eating its way through you, for example, you would feel that a lot more, right? But if it's sort of gently repurposing local cellular architecture, that starts to change things a little bit. And so I don't like. There's a bunch of stuff that I don't like about like more some interpretations of it. For instance, I'm not a huge fan of short incubation times, um, especially not for an XX121. I felt like that was sort of the thing was that they took a minute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alien 3 is great because it takes a while. Um, and so I prefer the 8 to 12 hours at least incubation period as opposed to the literal minutes
It
incubation period.
it allows for transmission in quotation marks. For the alien to actually be moved elsewhere and
Nailed
infect
it.
other regions.
Nailed it. It's actually not good. There are some viruses that are so deadly that they breed themselves out of existence because they kill their victims too fast for the victims to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much better if it's slow burning and people are just like, "Oh, this Chinese food doesn't work with me." Like so.
I mean, it does beg the question in Covenant where it is barely on his face before it's taken off.
Oh, I fucking
But he
hate
still
that.
gets chest bursted. It's like, okay, then why does it need to have this extended implantation period where it's on your face for at least over an hour, we would assume.
But hold on, there's an alternate interpretation of Covenant because David, let's admit it, it's David, peels the cheek thing off of whatever that generic character was. He's got all of those things inside him that he can spit back up. Why would he
Mm-hmm.
take the thing off the cheek unless he implants him physically himself off camera in that moment? Have
But
you heard
then
that idea?
what we see David spit up's face huggers though, not
Not in the
chest
original
burster
version.
embryos.
Originally, it was shot with little tiny chest bursters, and then later it was a reshoot that they put the facehuggers in. That's my understanding. So but I'm just saying there's the possibility that it's actually David who who infects him because that
Mhm.
facehugger is on him for literally 5 seconds.
But we also know the Aurum was infected very quickly as well because that all took place in a couple of hours over the night at least. So
Yeah.
there's already examples of the sped up life cycle there.
I guess they do address this though a little bit in Romulus, where Andy asks Rook, what are the odds? And he says 60-40. So perhaps it's a thing where it's like the longer it has on this person, the more chance this has of developing, until it's almost like a certainty that it will develop.
Oh, I think I would I would say that like the second you get face hugged, if that thing emits any pathogen into your system, you are screwed. Okay, that's how I feel about it as a writer. That's how I would handle it. I would
Before,
say that what it's
sorry,
looking.
Alex, I'm gonna have to interrupt you there because I want you to lay some groundwork here.
Okay.
Or I want you to lay some foundation for us from your point of view. So, Romulus obviously takes a lot of inspiration from what you have established in the Cold Forge with the Plagiarius Prepotence.
Uh-huh.
So, from your POV,
Mm-hmm.
is the Plagiarius the black goo, or is it a variation of? Because when you have things like into Charybdis, Blue going on about getting I can't remember the terminology you used, but they were
Plagiarist predecessor.
yeah, they were looking for an earlier untainted whatever version of it. So is the Plagiarius the black goo, or is it a variation of the black goo?
Okay, so prepotens is a variation of what I see as like black goo. They're not all the same. It's sort of like saying like, what kind of tardigrade is that, right? There's a bunch of different types of tardigrades. Um, and so I think that you have the kind that is intertwined with the alternation of generations for Monomelon exadria to emerge. So you have black goo, adult drone, egg morphing, face hugger, adult drone, egg morphing, face hugger, like that, which is the alternation of generations that you might see from a jellyfish and a hydra, right? Jellyfish swim around, they lay eggs, the eggs become hydras, the hydras lay eggs, they become jellyfish. Okay, and that was something that that was why I started consulting with Lolly, is because she wrote that article for Gizmodo about alternation of generations and how it's totally plausible to work for alien, and the alien life cycle makes complete sense from a biologist's perspective. So I think that the black goo, I think that there are several different strains of it, because what it represents to me is the fastest possible gene unzipping, rezipping system. And so, it's faster than CRISPR, which is a bacteriophage. So maybe it's a bacteriophage. Maybe it's, a number of other, biological organisms, but without necessarily pinning down the exact type of species that it is, I would say that Plagiaris is the family, right? And then Prepotens is the species name. But you could have other types of Plagiaris.
Alex, would you say then in Prometheus, from the beginning of the film on, we're actually seeing multiple variations? Like what the engineer at the very beginning drinks and melts from would be a different strain than the weaponized version we see thousands of years later.
Right. In fact, I think that that's just a strain that just unzips. Right. And so he gets broken down into his various amino acids. He becomes sort of the fodder for what will eventually emerge as humanity. Um, and I think that's strongly implied in the film's opening.
Okay, this is where I think the black goo becomes less frustrating, but also still frustrating at the same time. So let's lay some. I don't want to say that.
When I
phrase again.
wrote Cold Forge, I had no idea I was going to be having this debate years and years and years later.
Let's go back to Prometheus. Let's go back to the start. Let's talk about our reactions to the portrayal.
Uh-huh.
Because that is where this is a controversial topic. It's its own internal portrayal, its own internal consistency, its implications for the alien, its implications for the wider lore, and whether that's a detraction or a benefit, considering where Scott's going or was attempting to go with the the franchise. So Zella, you can lead us off. Black goo, when it was first introduced in Prometheus, thoughts, and has that changed in later portrayal?
Yeah, so regardless of my ultimate feelings on Prometheus, like I still have a complicated relationship with both the prequels. There's things about them I really like, but they're also really frustrating for me. And I still remember that original Blu-ray set, reading Ridley Scott's introduction to the set and teasing that he's finally going to do this Alien prequel, and just being so hyped. We're going to see this thing we've always wondered about, the space jockeys. Like, that's finally going to be explored a little bit. And then naturally, nothing can compare to the mystery of our own imaginations, right? We hold up Scott as like, oh, this guy is just gonna have this thing that totally blows our minds and it's gonna be awesome. But it's not awesome for everybody, unfortunately. But I was intrigued the whole lead up to Prometheus. I was like, okay. First they were saying it's an Alien prequel. Now they're saying it's not, and it's kind of been spun off into something else.
Yeah.
And then we start seeing these leaked images, which look very alien-esque. We see this chamber with these biomechanical walls that have these ampules that are in this room as if they were eggs, but they're not. And they're these jars, and it's really eerie and mysterious looking. I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. That's wild. What is that? And eventually I see Prometheus, and I'm like, huh, that was interesting. I'm going to need to think about that one. And I see it a few more times, and I kind of solidify in my opinion that, wow, that really was not what I was hoping for an Alien prequel, although still very impressive, although still very beautiful, yada yada yada. But the black goo was certainly an element of it that I felt, even in Prometheus, seemed very, I guess, something that Damon Lindelof or J.J. Abrams would write, where it's just like, here's this mysterious thing that is completely central to the plot that does whatever the hell we want it to. And then at the end of the story, we're kind of like, the whole thing was just a setup for another one that we have no idea. Everybody died, but we'll get our answers in the next one, except we never will. So the black goo for me was very frustrating. Although in Prometheus, I was also wondering about it. I was like, okay, what are these engineers running from? Like, we see all these holograms of them running down the hallway. Like, what exactly happened here that they are running from? And the characters speculate, like, there was an outbreak here. So were they experimenting on this thing? They got infected. They're trying to escape. But if they're trying to escape, why are they like, okay, we're going to escape and then we're going to destroy Earth right after, right? So it's like, okay.
I definitely have some thoughts on that.
And then I'd be curious to hear those. But to wrap up, yeah, Prometheus. I mean, the effects were interesting in that they were different depending on the method of infection, right? Where we have Fifield, who falls in it, it's on his face. In one iteration, he turns into a zombie. In another, he starts mutating into a xenomorph-esque creature. And then we have Holloway, who his drink is spiked, and he has sex with Shaw. And then he starts to degrade in a sense that's kind of looking like we saw at the beginning of the film, where he's breaking down, kind of like the engineer was breaking down. But he's just in so much pain that he begs for death, and Vickers obliges him. But then Shaw is implanted, even though she's infertile, she's implanted with this embryo that's growing rapidly. She doesn't really have any consequence of this infection at all. It's completely contained in the embryo and not excuse me, not
Is
infecting her
it?
body, as far as we know. I mean, she did
How did she
last.
look in Covenant last you saw her?
I mean,
Just curious.
she could just been tired and hungry. It's a long trip on a food that, on a ship that who knows how much food they have. Like,
She looked like she got turned into a piece of biomechanical art.
well, that was
I-
after David did.
I think that a case could be made that was David rather than the black goo.
Yeah.
Although you could go either way, I suppose, depending on what the writer
If
wants
I
to do
was
with
gonna
it.
write, if I was gonna write the interstitial between those two, I would
Which
say
still needs to happen, by the way. Titan, if you're listening, come on.
checks, big checks. But if I was going to write the interstitial between those two, I'll give you this one for free. I would say it would be about how she is starting to get infected and she needs help. She doesn't trust David, but the only way that she can get a cure is if she gets him into a full body. She fights to get him into a full body. She figures out how to make a good enough repair. He betrays her in the end, using her as an experiment and hatching probably numerous creatures from her until he gets what he wants. That would be sort of the way I would take it, because I think of this as an infection you never get rid of. And I understand that certain games don't necessarily agree with me. Certain games that I wrote don't necessarily agree with me. But to anyone listening on the podcast, you need to understand that these decisions are not only made by one person when you work on a multi-million-dollar project. Um, and so I see infection as something that you should never be allowed to get rid of. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the comics are very pulpy. Um, is because you can just takesy backsies, right? It's just like Jean Grey just never dying, you know. And I think that comic book element of resurrection has made it really, like, oh, let's just get them to an auto dock. Everybody should go to an auto dock all the time. We'll just pull people out of the auto dock constantly. Um, and for me, I think that that's terrible. I think that it should be something that is the hardest thing to fight off in the world. And I don't think that there should be a cure for the perfect organism. And I don't think, like, because I'm going to be honest, it doesn't, if you start curing it, it's not even all that perfect. What's the score now? Like humans 30, aliens 0, right? Like,
Well, I suppose it depends if we're looking at the whole wider thing there and which interpretation we're looking at, and
right. We're just
all
catching the
that kind
lucky
of stuff.
few stories, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the argument for the Predators' losses and victories as well there. But
Yeah. And they're the ultimate hunter, unless a camera comes around, then they suck.
exactly.
I think for me, at the end of the day, though, what it did was it made. I mean, eventually, first of all, in Prometheus, the alien hadn't appeared yet, right? So we see these things that look like an alien, like this trilobite, which kind of has the face hugger trait of implanting an embryo. And then we see the deacon, which we never see again, but it looks kind of like from the same family of aliens, like early on or something like that.
Right.
So with those, we're like, okay, there's some xenomorphic stuff going on here, but these are obviously not xenomorphs proper.
Right. That's not prepotens. That's plagiaris something.
Okay.
And from my perspective, because those jars, that could be hundreds of different strains.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that is something I would have preferred to have been. I can buy that, Alex. I can buy that very well because it has basis in that film's developmental history. Because Space's earlier draft, when David's on the derelict as it is then, he says something to Shaw along the lines of the cargo. There's many different cargo holds. They all contain a variation of this creature. Because in Space thing, the engineers were developing a proto form of the alien into their own weapon. So it does have basis in the development of the film. And that's one of the things I miss about, I much prefer Space's incarnation. There's problems with it. But it doesn't relate to the frustration of the Black Goo. And yeah, I would have liked something in Prometheus to have talked about that. But that is where I think the EU goes a long way to fixing problems with the interpretation of the Black Goo, of the pathogen, because pretty much, I think more the RPG and yourself start to suggest that everything is alternate variations. The RPG has this thing about the 20-something Draconis strain. I can't remember offhand. Is one that starts it off. And then in the Colonial Marines operational manual, they talk about 2 other variations. The UPP are developing their own variations and all that kind of stuff. And, why I asked you to lay your groundwork with what you thought Protegarius was, I was like, because Alex has also considered this with what Blue was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, like Adam, the Black Goo frustrated the shit out of me when I first watched that. You know, it does all sorts of different things. There's a one little bit of commonality in there, in that things kind of look alien. You know, even the not trilobite, even the
Beacon.
hammerpede.
Oh,
You know,
oh yeah.
when it does its thing, it looks kind of like the inside of a face
It,
hugger.
it's got a real vagina face.
Yeah. So
Um, sorry. I mean, look, it's Aliens is a real genitalia based series, and if you
yeah,
don't know that, you just haven't watched closely enough.
no, there's no denying that at all. But you know, outside of that, it you know, it had a reputation for being a do whatever the fuck the writer wants it to do kind of thing,
Yes.
and that is frustrating from an audience point of view when there's no internal consistency between your MacGuffin.
So, yeah. So what I would say is, I feel like the internal consistency is technically there, but just like the idea that, oh, maybe David implanted them off screen. Look, if it's not thoroughly conveyed in cinematic language in ways that are accessible to the audience in a single viewing, then that is something of a failure. Please still hire me, Scott Free Productions. I'm sorry for saying that. You know, and so I think that when you're looking at sort of what it does and what it's for, you have to just be saying like, well, which strain am I actually looking at? That's the one that I'm always sort of interested in. And one of the reasons why I think that I actually did like it was, first of all, it provided me a perfect MacGuffin for the Cold Forge, right? All of a sudden, it's like, oh, it's this thing that we're trying to extract that we haven't really been able to properly extract without these kinds of, exercises and samples and all that other stuff. That makes it real simple for me. And when Covenant came out linking Prometheus together, I, in the middle of me working on that publication, it ruled. It just like completely, like, it gave me access to the goo. All of a sudden, Blue, being a geneticist, snapped right into place. Everything that I think of as, it gave everything an internal consistency and a backbone that I could really get behind. And if you say that engineers are the greatest biomechanical species in the galaxy, and then you then go on and say, well, what is their actual big technology? Their actual big technology is this alchemical organism that they've created, this thing that is rapidly programmable, right? So when people say like, oh, how did David use Linnaean breeding, like orchid breeding, to make XX121? How could that even be possible? I'll tell you how it could be possible. This is the most programmable species of bacterium in the galaxy, right? And so if that is something that is achievable, just, in whatever this weird Greco-Roman engineering society is, then David's probably walking around with a bunch of their tech, which is something that they didn't explore, really. Also, it was weird. It was like he killed all these people and was like, "Oh, I think I'll take this flute." Like, did they not have any phones or anything? Like, um,
And that, well, that's another victim of film development there, because they were supposed to be like a shield around the planet that sensed the outbreak and went "Froop." no ship
ah,
no ships leaving, no communications coming out, get fucked. And there was supposed to be like a whole sea storyline of Tennessee on the ship dealing with the satellites that were generating the shield.
oh, that would have been nice. That
So
that sounds cool. Yeah, I would have enjoyed watching that.
I feel like in the last 40 minutes, Alex has put more thought into the black goo than Damon Lindelof did in the entire time he was writing it. He, going off of that JJ mindset that he'd picked up on,
yeah,
it's all set up, set up, set up, and no thought about how it connects or what it leads to. Which is funny, because when Prometheus came out and they were trying to work on a sequel, and they didn't hire him back, you'll notice, but he's saying, "Why can't somebody come up with a sequel to this thing?" And it's funny because someone said to me, the obvious sequel to Prometheus is Metroid. You have this augmented character who's in this alien ship, and they're going planet to planet, and everything. There's these hostile organisms, which that's kind of a lighthearted version potentially. But I would love to have seen one more adventure with Shaw. I would love for her to have not been
Oh,
another tragic loss.
mm.
You know, while at the same time, I agree with Alex. I don't think anyone should get out of this scot free. I don't. I don't think anyone should be infected and walk away from it. Um, I can't think of many examples. I haven't read a lot of the modern comics, but
it would
actually,
Oh,
It
they're
would only
fucking pulling chest bursters out left and right in the Hendrix comics.
well where it lasts in terms of like Alex's interpretation. I can only think of two real examples, and that would be Colonial Marines the game and the Technical Operations Manual. I think posits it in there if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you should just never get away from it. I think no matter what, it should ruin you. Because that's supposedly the power of it. I think the only way to fight it would be to have a strain that was programmed to fight it.
Right.
But even
but then you're
that,
infected with that. You know, that's your new infection.
let me tell you something. I hate alien kryptonite. I hate it. I don't want to see a fungus curing people. I don't want to see you getting sprayed with a chest burster cure. I don't like it. I'm not into that. That's not
No
for
leaves,
me.
Alex.
Yeah.
Shots fired at Scott Siegler. Come on, we're gonna have author fighting here.
No.
That would be a fun debate.
Scott and I talked about it, and I was, he talked about it when he was in development on it, and he said, what do you think? And I was like, it's not a choice I would make, but at the same time, I'm not going to tell you that it wouldn't work. It's a fictional organism. Right?
Personally, I've always liked that little bit of hope that remains. I mean, we had this hinted at as early as Alien 3, right? Where he's like, they can do an operation. They have the technology.
She's the bad guy. Is the bad
Yeah.
guy?
I know, but it makes it more powerful that maybe Ripley could have been saved, but she still chooses to sacrifice herself. Not to fall back on the whole like, well, it takes away from Ripley thing, which is sometimes used. But I do kind of like the whole there's some hope there, whatever small sliver of hope there that it can be extracted. I personally I have problems with the first runs of the Alien comics, but I did like the idea that he's still kind of psychologically linked to the aliens in some way.
Adam's
that it gave
talking
him
about Marvel here. Just to
Yeah.
clarify. You didn't say-
yeah.
I thought for a
Sorry.
second you were going after Verhaden. Don't go after Verhaden.
No, total tangent
All right.
here. But so in the first Marvel comics, the character of Gabriel survives a chest burster that was in him, but it still plagues him with nightmares and even maybe some kind of telepathic link to the aliens. Is that right, Aaron?
The implication that it is that he is connected to the alien hive mind in some fashion.
Okay.
Right, the woman in the darkness.
And even with the black goo, the comic makes an insinuation that I believe you liked, Aaron, which is that the engineers did not create the black goo, but they came across it themselves. And the black goo is kind of this cleansing fire for when a species gets too advanced, it inevitably comes across this stuff, wants to manipulate it, and it ends up being the end of them.
Right, the great filter.
Yeah.
I like the idea of cyclical ancient terrors. It's a big part of why I have such a huge, I don't want to say soft spot because it's not a soft spot. I fucking love Mark Schultz's Destroying Angels, Apocalypse, the Destroying Angels, and Clytel, the mad scientist character in that.
The names are horrible in that. I can never keep any of them straight. But yes,
the mad scientist in that posits that the alien is a destroying angel, a force that shows up again and again every time a civilization gets sufficiently developed enough to discover it, tries to take advantage of it, and then gets fucked over by it. That is the same implication that Marvel was going for there with this whole Prometheus as fire, with it being the black goo instead.
One nice point with that, though, with the Marvel, when they talk about, if a civilization gets too large, they come into contact with this, and the first thing they try to do is adapt themselves to it, which I love that that's exactly what Romulus was positing, was that Weyland-Yutani was saying, oh, we can totally make better colonists with this stuff, which I thought, I don't think they read the Marvel comics. I just think it's another good idea that kind of percolates up.
Well, that has to do with, and that was very similar to my thinking in the Cold Forge, which was that if you're going to be doing a bunch of colonizing, if we go like, oh, we're going to be colonizing Mars, it's like, okay, well, you're going to be exposed to a noonday sun's worth of radiation every day because there's no magnetic belt, and you may be fine for a bit, but what are the epigenetic effects of walking outside and breathing a bit of cobalt dust every time, or you know, catching way too many rays 100% of the time while living in almost total darkness from cloud cover? Like, what does that do to your DNA? What does that do to your lineage? And when they started saying in Romulus, they were like, yeah, basically we're not meant to be a spacefaring species. And I was like, exactly. But the engineers are, because they figured it out. That's why they're engineers. That's why when they broke down, humanity emerged. And then when you start combining them with compound zero, then Z01, sorry, then you get an engineer baby, right? Like the idea being that the difference between the humans and the engineers is the black goo.
Well, you saying they figured it out makes me think back to in Prometheus where they're running from it. And this reminds me of another fan theory that there were multiple factions of engineers. Like you had maybe ones that were more peaceful. And Yanis says in Prometheus maybe this was a military installation. So this
Yeah.
could have been like a splinter group of engineers that maybe wanted to experiment with this substance for more warfaring reasons, and it turned on them, like he said. And we see it affect them when David, drops the bombs on the city. You have all these weird black kind of appendage-looking things coming out of them.
Which
Mhm.
doesn't quite work to what he says, but then you can always go on that unreliable narrator angle with David. It's a crutch that everybody leans on. But he says to the crew, it either kills them outright or they become host to a creature. I forget the exact dialogue. I watched it the other day. I should remember this. But that is basically what he says. You either die or you become a host to something. And I don't think the flashback depicts that really. I never thought that was the implication of these weird fucking tentacle things.
But that's
Because
how it happened in Inferno's Fall.
yeah,
Yes,
well, I also
that's
have a
true.
problem with that depiction in Inferno's Fall.
Oh.
Personally.
Interesting.
Back to what Adam was talking about for a second, though. If you look at the engineers at the beginning, in the opening scene, and the engineers that we then see on LV-223, they're different. From the neck down, one of them has a biomechanical aspect to them that I don't think is supposed to be a suit. I think that, again, we're talking.
It's just body.
I think they've changed themselves. I think this group at least is playing with the black goo and making new clothing. Because that opening scene is clearly, if that's supposed to be the origin of life on Earth, we're not talking just a 2,000-year gap that's posited elsewhere in the film. That's a lot further back. But so something has changed either in all of engineer society or at least in a small group that has made this more um, uh, violent version. And then the question is, what we see in Covenant, are those also engineers, or are those, as some people like to say, another seed race, another example of where the engineers have come in and made a new version of themselves, because they don't look the same.
There is an argument for that.
Mhm.
And that is, as Christian says, they don't look the same. They do not have the same prosthetics that they were depicted with in Prometheus. But then Scott intended them to be engineers. The writers intended them to be engineers. So this is when it becomes one of those real world budget trimming sort of things that then starts to try and leak into the lore.
Yeah, because in a lot of his interviews, he was like, the engineers will want revenge for that and for what he did to their city. Like he definitely he's referred to them as engineers, the ones we see in Covenant.
And we spoke to some of the extras as well, who were engineer extras, and that was a question we asked them. When you were on set, what was the intent? What were you called? And I think I forget which one of them it was. I think we did like a joint 3 people interview, and whichever one of them it was said something like, the design, the set design, costume design, and whatever, always referred to them as her engineers. Which obviously isn't Scott, but that intent filters down. But there is arguments to be had there.
Yeah, I also want to point out that I think that Wayland was the one who was like, I think that Peter Whalen is the one who's like, hey, I want you to experiment on Holloway. I think when he tells David that,
Yeah.
that forces David into that first law conundrum of like, do I or don't I obey an indirect order or a direct order that will indirectly kill someone?
And then
And
Holloway
David's
gives
like,
him permission.
right. And it's like, well, I guess if the gloves are off, I'll just kill everyone. You know, I think it's sort of where he, you know, like, because like Davis gets the same order and Davis goes in the opposite direction. He's like, I'll just save everyone, you know. And so, you know, I think that androids, they sort of go haywire when they get an order like that,
Hmm.
and some for good and some for bad. That's something that you'll see secretly in my books that I just sort of put in there, and I hope that nobody cares. But the thing is, if Peter Whalen is like, "Hey, I want you to experiment on Holloway," and then Holloway is like, "Oh no, I'm turning into nothing. Please kill me," uh, then when he comes in at the end and he's talking to the engineer and he's like, "Give me the secret of immortality," what he's really saying is like, "Which one of these jars was I supposed to drink here?" Right? Because we tried one or two of them, and which one, you know, and by the way, I think what happens in that scene, and I realize that there are several interpretations, including ones where the engineer's like talking to David and back and forth. I think that what happens in that scene, where the engineer's like, I think I need to destroy Earth right now, is
But
he
we see
need,
they were going there before, though, because it was
Yeah.
like the destination was locked in.
Because of Space Jesus.
Mhm.
That's what was in the script, and I'll never forgive it
Well,
because it's so stupid.
I don't know if it was ever in a script, Christian, but it was definitely something he said
It was
as a
Ridley Scott's
consideration.
intention. It was Ridley Scott's intention. You know, I've seen an interview with him where he gets all kind of coy about it, but he had this idea, and they're specifically setting the date of its 2,000 years, and you know. But the problem is, overall, we have these two films that are too good to ignore and too bad to truly understand. And so the framework
That is great. I love that.
we're all working as fans and as professional writers, Alex, to make this make sense and to build something. And the beauty of Romulus, of course, is that now it's come full circle. That the new generation of filmmakers are saying, "Oh, what Alex wrote here makes sense. That's what we'll go with." And so we're creating that bridge so we can keep moving forward with this stuff. I don't understand Covenant. I don't understand how it fits in. I don't understand what we're supposed to be getting from the various mutations that we see. And Prometheus doesn't help me with that. And then because there's no continuation of it, we're just kind of left with like, oh, well, that was weird, you know.
But what? Okay, so Covenant is, in my opinion, a reset to what Prometheus was prior to Lindelof in many ways. So, like,
plus trying to placate the fans that desperately wanted the Blomkamp action shoot 'em up Aliens sequel. That first trailer for Covenant shows guys running with guns and handing out guns and guns, as though that's what it was going to be. And that was never what Ridley Scott wanted. You can tell because he didn't design anything new for the guns. They're just off the shelf.
Yeah.
But like Fox wanted to tap into that energy because there was so much excitement about Blomkamp. So keep going.
Can you
No.
imagine just being in a position as a, you know, like I'm dying to be a writer director one of these days. Can you imagine being in a position to go, gosh, I didn't get it right the first time. Let me try that again with another 200 million.
That's certainly something Ridley Scott can do. But I still have my conspiracy theory that the studio was like, you got to put an alien in it or we're going with Blomkamp. And so, because there's so much interesting you don't think so?
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory.
You think that's what happened?
There is a quote somewhere, and I cannot for the life of me remember where it came from. But it's that thing of Ridley going, "They want fucking aliens. I'll give them fucking aliens." And it's like that whole Walter Hill and David Garler equaling David and Walter thing. That I know for the life of me, I saw an interview with him say, "No, we didn't name it after the producers, but that's a good idea. I'm going to take that forward and tell people that from now on." And I can't find that interview. So it's also the same thing of I can't find the interview where Scott said they want aliens, I'll give them fucking aliens thing.
because he then was gloating that the film didn't do as well as Prometheus, and he tied it to the alien. He's trying to say, look, I did what they wanted. I had an alien in it. The film didn't do as well. Let me make Prometheus Part 2.
Self-sabotage. I mean, I think you can feel his cynicism in the film through the handling of the alien, certainly. So I kind of wouldn't be surprised if it was deliberate self-sabotage there. But what was the point I was getting?
No. Okay, I'm so sorry. I know I just came back, and like, there's no way that somebody who considers himself the author of the franchise, leaving off Dan O'Bannon for some reason, would ever self-sabotage. You don't self-sabotage. You don't be like, if you don't want to make the alien movie, you just don't make the alien movie. It's not like he's strapped for cash. That's not how any of that would work, right? Every single time he comes in there, he swings for the fences in whatever way he deems swinging for the fences, right? And so, like, I guarantee you, he intended to do most of what's in there, right? There's going to be some EP, executive producer, who's going to come in and say something horrible, right? I can tell you, as a writer, sometimes you get that.
The Walter and David stuff is what he wanted to make a film about, and everything else gets short shrift. I swear to God that it isn't even that much of the film, honestly. But it's those moments where the two of them are having their android conversations. That is everything that Ridley Scott wanted to say with this movie. The rest of it is the build up to get us there, and then the last act is like, okay, and here's an alien. There you go.
Well, I mean, if you look at the name Prometheus, it's about David, right? It's okay. So that's the original name of Frankenstein.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And so David is the creature assembled by the shitty doctor who's like, I don't care about anyone or anything. I only care about myself and my aspirations. And then the creature gets loose. The creature that gets loose is Frankenstein's monster, right? And so
The
David
modern
is
Prometheus. Yeah.
yes, David is the modern Prometheus. That's what in my opinion, that's what the title is actually referencing. And so in Covenant, when he comes in there and he starts doing a gothic Victorian,
Is it Bride of Frankenstein? Is that what you're positing, Alex?
Oh, 100%, 100%. It's not Bride of Frankenstein. I mean, he killed her, but
New bride.
but he sort of worships at her grave on a regular basis. Like, he loves her in his own sort of twisted way, because you should not trust computers, listeners. But yeah, no, I think that what and I think that that's a good reason for the engineers to want to destroy Earth, is because when they make humanity, I interpret that engineer's reaction in two ways. And I realize that I've left off Space Jesus and some Apocrypha and things like that. So let's just take what was in the actual movie and I'll try and stick with that. What if the engineer, and this is something I genuinely believe, if the engineers are going around and they're making all these different biomechanical organisms, all these different things. These are different weapons. These are different this, different that, right? And they store them in warehouses, right? That's the Hammerpeed. It's in a warehouse now. And there's, Earth is the warehouse of just another engineer creation. Okay, and so when it meets us, it's like, oh no, they've broken containment. First of all. So now I'm talking to, it would be like if a xenomorph came up to you and was like, Dad? And you're like, this is a problem. And then it introduces something even worse. Here is the man that I have made. And David speaks to the engineer in his divine fucking tongue. And the engineer's like, Earth's gotta go. This isn't gonna work for me.
But then you've also got to remember that the intent was that they would kill them 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry to shoot down that one.
Because they killed Space Jesus, because he was there to educate them. And
can I throw my really wacky theory at you guys?
That's why I said what's in the movie, not the Apocrypha. Okay,
the 2,000 year thing is in the movie though.
It is. It is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's been a minute.
No,
As it should be. As it should be. I have this just because of where I'm coming from as a Lovecraft nerd. The novel At the Mountains of Madness is of this alien species that colonizes Earth, accidentally makes humanity, and they have this servitor race, a slave race of creatures called the Shoggoths that they use to build their stuff and do all their menial labor. The Shoggoths rise up, they overthrow these elder things, and now they're just kind of running rampant, and they hate everything that the elder things ever made, including humans. I think this can be applied to Prometheus. I think that what we're seeing at the beginning of the film, the engineers are the Shoggoths. They are the servitor race. There's something in the spaceship up in the air that looks like a flying saucer. We never know what that is. We never see what that is. That's the actual creator race. Maybe those are the elephant, trunks.
the actual space jockeys.
The actual space jockeys. Okay. In the million years, 2,000 years in particular, since then, no. Between the million years and the 2,000 years ago, the engineers, who are these Shoggoths, rise up, overthrow their masters, and are out to destroy everything that the true creators had made. And so 2,000 years ago, they fully intended to come to Earth and destroy the humans. Oops, there was a spill. We got to go into stasis. And when they wake up, exactly like Alex is saying, this thing that we already don't like because we were forced to make it by our oppressive overlords. Now it's here in my bedroom and it's talking to me. And as you said, it brought a dog and the dog is talking to me. And this is all very, very scary. I love all of that. But that's my personal explanation for what we see at the beginning and then the hostility that we see. And the final reasoning for that, to tie this all together. And again, we're doing more thinking about this than Lindelof ever did, is that there's the cave paintings. The cave paintings say, come to this star, come meet us at this star. We go to that star and it's a weapons depot. Wasn't always weapons depot. The whole place has been sort of retrofit by this either splinter group or the entire.
Oh, that does make some sense there.
Yeah. And the final bit to that is that there are holes in the gigantic human head. There's holes across the face. When we go to Covenant, there's no holes on those faces. They're just the huge heads. At the Mountains of Madness, the Shoggoths burn holes in all of the artwork that the Elder Things had made in the exact same pattern. This is completely random, but I'm interpreting it as definitely the explanation for this, is that they are defacing the face of their god or the face of at least the artwork created by this. So there you go. That's for free. That's my Lovecraftian interpretation of Prometheus. But I never thought about modern Prometheus being the explanation of the title. So that's the Shelley. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, like if it wasn't just like spilling over into the film with Shelley, I wouldn't have guessed it either. So
that's a nice, I think, alternate to the general popular fan theory, which is that the engineers are just imitating the space jockeys, and it's a nice way.
Your theory.
No, that is not me. I was never the one to posit that. Thank you, sir. But I was always fine with that interpretation, mostly because don't get me wrong, I like the engineers in that blank kind of facial way. I think they look scary. The black eyes in particular, the empty eyes, I think are terrifying. But I don't like them being the space jockeys. I never have. So that's why I've always been like, yeah, okay, I'll accept that theory that they're just imitating the gods. And I think to some extent that's also made it into the RPG as well. I think that was mentioned in.
Well, let's take actually one of my favorites from back in the day. At the end of Labyrinth, don't the space jockeys show up? And was it?
Are you thinking the OG series?
Yeah.
So that would have no. They go through so many names. Book 1, book 2.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the end of book 1, you might be thinking, Alex.
It was either that or it was. Gosh, it's so hard to remember. But it was at the end of one of the '90s novels. You know, it's like all hope is lost and the aliens are coming, and then the space jockey just comes over and just vaporizes everything.
Yeah, that's book one. That's
Yep.
book one.
Yep.
And it's like, see ya. You know, just flies off.
And because they were transitioning from the Verhaeden stuff to, I think it's a genocide, there's this one shot that maybe it was in Dark Horse Presents or whatever, where the space jockey's ship is floating over Earth. And so the president of the United States is sent over in a shuttle and docks and goes in and gets to meet the Elephant Man. And of course, then it turns out that his entire crew are actually secret androids, and they're trying to fight the guy. And the president has a chest burster inside him. The chest burster comes out and bites the space jockey on the neck, and that's how they kill him. And then they blow the whole thing up.
That
90s.
that fucking series is atrocious. So, you know, Mark Verheiden's intent throughout the first 3 runs was that, you know, the aliens were a tool of the space jockeys to basically clear the planet off. And then the space jockeys would move in and terraform the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when this one shot comes out, because Mark Verheiden moves on. They transition to, I think it was John Arcudi. And I think he wrote that short as well. And they were basically like, okay, we need to tie this up and get rid of the space jockey and move on. And yeah, that was, it's a big robed space jockey in the middle of a television center. You know, imagine the architect from The Matrix. And then yeah, it gets chest busted. That short is awful.
I know we've kind of tangented a bit from the goo to the space jockey, but I
jockeys.
think representative of just how impactful to the franchise the prequels were, because not only did we have this new substance introduced that was at the center of the story, there was this thing, the space jockey, that we always had some kind of vague idea of, and that had been explored a little bit in the comics and books we've talked about. And then it's completely different. And this was questioned in Charles de Lauzirika's documentary, even by people who were working on the film. People express in interviews like, I did not like this idea that they were these human-like albino figures in this suit. Like, and they kept trying to push for more biomechanical things. Like the most biomechanical thing we see in Prometheus is the engineer in the pressure suit, as it's called. Even though, yes, Christian, and excuse me, it looks like just his body. So that's interesting, because when you compare it to the other creatures born of the pathogen in that film and in Covenant, they are more white. They're not very biomechanical looking. Like you have the snake, you have the trilobite, you have the deacon, which is the darkest of looking of all of them in Prometheus. But then you have the neomorphs in the following film. So there's definitely something that's kind of distinct from the biomechanical xenomorphs that we are used to. And so another thing that really has me scratching my head with Prometheus is the ampule room itself. They go in there. These ampules are set up in the ground. Who knows where these worms came from? If they were there, I think they were probably already there. So this to me looks like it's some sort of experimentation room or deployment room, because Shaw talks about how, the temperature, the atmosphere is causing this change in the room, and then we see these ampules start to ooze. And David freezes one, takes it back to the ship, but there has to have been a temperature change after that, but it doesn't seem to have affected it. And then we see them just stable on the shelf in Covenant. So I'm like, there's something about this room with the head that's sealed. And we see this room again in the game Fireteam Elite with the ampules and stuff all over the floor. So this is different than a storage room. And if it was just like you take it out of a controlled cold environment or something like that, you have to think it would always just start erupting or whatever. But that's not the case. It only starts to do that in that room.
And that one time.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's another one of those ones where it's like Christian says, you know, we're putting more thought into this than Lindelof did. In some regards, I think that's also a product of the time. You know, Lindelof was specifically brought on not just to make things less alien, but to make things more lost. Scott wanted to get people talking about the films. He wanted there to be conversations afterwards. And they got that throughout, which is always, I mean, I've said since I came out of that film that, you know, Scott's going to get his intent here, but is it a good thing that it's because like this is different to us going, oh, did the company really know about the alien before they sent the Nostromo? And this is where I find it frustrating as depicted in the films, at least in Prometheus specifically, is this lack of consistency through what's given to us in the film. And this is where I've kind of turned around a little bit on it. I don't hate the black goo as much anymore. And to be fair, once I went, oh, it's just royal jelly, I didn't hate it as much anyway because I was like, oh, I'm used to royal jelly. But what the EU has done to make it a bit more consistently, apart from things related to Fireteam, which annoys me. I don't like Fireteam's interpretation of it.
But we'll get to this topic. Keep going.
But
I would love to hear your thoughts.
I like this thing of it makes alien-esque things, you know, and that's become the common thread of it, and that's where I like it more because if the alien ends up being some fucking thing that David made last week, he made it using the black goo, and we don't know the origins of the black goo,
and bugs.
And bugs.
Sorry?
He made it using the black goo and bugs.
And bugs. There you go. And engineers a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, true.
So, well, just quick though, and this relates to what Adam was talking about. In that room, there isn't just the head, right? There's the gigantic head that looks very humanoid.
The murals.
There's the murals, and there's the bas relief of a very alien-looking creature with that weird glowing green stone on a pedestal in front of it. But one of those murals has like a dog-like alien race being subjugated by the engineers. They're sort of cowering. So this room is
Kathy.
They're not the Drew.
I know.
Out of the Shadows. Is that?
Yeah, but Tim Leben didn't intend it to be the.
Okay,
no, I know.
That's funny though.
But
silly. Yeah, there's things in that room that are inexplicable and very, very interesting. And I wish that thought had been put into those. I want to know what the glowing green stone is. That again was, I believe, added in post because it was originally like a bowl.
It was the bowl from the start of the film originally.
So what's the change? Why? I don't mind the green, but
somebody said, "Why are these ampules melting?" And somebody said, "Put a green rock there."
Put a green rock there.
But it does.
So let's actually, if I could just
go for
one second here. I think what's interesting about this conversation is we're sitting here and we're splitting hairs big time over all this canonical injection, right? The Alien franchise got an injection of black goo itself, right? And canonical injections are sort of like what they call comics about comics, where the entire purpose of the comic is to retcon another part of the comic or to add some sort of canonical interpretation of something, and it does nothing for the story. And it's like, you know, my problem with Prometheus is that I hate everyone in it. It has nothing to do with anything else. The cartographer gets lost, the biologist tries to hug a snake, you know, like
yeah, the black goo is one of many frustrations with
the black goo. I don't even know why the black goo rates. Right, the fact that somebody was like, maybe it was an outbreak, and everybody doesn't go, you know, like put the helmets back on, you know, like,
right.
Hey, it smells musty in here. Gee, you think that's an organism you're eating and breathing now? You know, like that kind of stuff. It's you know, the fact, I think everybody's mad about the quarantine protocols, which is something that, you know, is doubly frustrating since it's addressed in the very first fucking film, right? Like, and so what I have the tack that I have always taken as I write this series, and I write this series more often than I ever expected to, let me tell you. The tack that I always take 100% of the time is don't invent new canon. And I got to name the stupid stuff, but don't invent new canon. That's because whenever somebody wastes their time on it, they're not telling a story about humans anymore. They're telling a story about, oh, where did the black goo come? Who gives a shit where the black goo came from? You know,
Fans.
Yeah, no, I know, but like they care more when it's about something that matters.
I think it's more than just, yes, the characters in that film are fucking stupid. Nobody likes them. I hate Shaw for a start because I
Oh,
think
I don't. She's the least hateable.
I
Holloway is like the worst person alive. He's like, why are we even here? Everything's dead. And I'm like, you just got out of a place full of live stuff. You barely
well,
mapped the place.
his thing is also he's a fucking archaeologist. They never established early on his intent was to meet a live engineer. They're just going to prove the theory, and then when he gets fucky about it, that's a whole other frustration. But like Shaw as a protagonist, I fucking hate her because
I
she
thought you liked Shaw.
no, she embodies a problem
thought-
with us as people, as culture. It's what,
It's what I choose to believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So
Yep.
it's interesting that you bring up retcon, Alex, because I felt myself that Prometheus and Covenant, like if anyone has a right to retcon Alien, it is Scott. But those movies felt like retcons to me in terms of like, okay, the space jockey wasn't what it looked like. It was this. It wasn't a giant fossilized being, which we still don't know how the hell this ancient ship got to LV-426. But it was these humanoid beings that we had some sort of relationship with. And
Yeah,
they
wild
wanted,
that happened after O'Bannon died, you know?
yeah. And they wanted to destroy us for some unexplained reason. And then in the second one, it's like, oh, it's not some ancient creature. Who knows where it came from? It was an android with daddy issues who has developed this hatred for humanity, even though he still loves this woman. There's another weird fan theory that it's like he developed a hatred for humanity and he wanted Shaw to like transcend, and that's why he wanted to experiment on her. And she refused, so he just used her for experiments instead. Whole other discussion. But
Reasonable, I say.
so to me, again, when it comes down to it, going back to my excitement for Prometheus that I saw from that first blurb from Scott, I wanted to know more, and then when I did, it wasn't satisfying. And I, having thought about it in retrospect now, I think I'm just on your side in terms of the Lovecraft stuff, Christian. Is that the xenomorph is just way more interesting when it's this thing we don't know about that's just been out there for who knows how long. Same with the space jockey. That's even a greater mystery, I think, than the xenomorph in the original film. And so those things, when you try and explain all of them and it's not a satisfying explanation, and then they try and explore more of that explanation in expanded media and future stories and stuff, it frustrates fans. Because I think fans, there's been some stories that have taken the black goo and ran with it, including yours, Alex, where I'm like, wow, you really did some interesting stuff with this, with the Cold Forge, and even more so, I think, into Charybdis, where holy shit, you took this, spoilers, you took this thing that now can make someone turn into a xenomorph and still maintain their cognition and speech. That is fucking insane. Like, that is super interesting. I want to explore that. So that is a great use of prequel elements. Fireteam Elite, I thought, made excellent use of prequel elements. You're going to disagree with me, Aaron. Here's okay.
I gotta hear this.
So this is what I alluded to before, right? So after Prometheus, what's the first thing we get? We get the largest crossover comic series we've ever gotten, which is Life and Death, Fire and Stone.
Fire and Stone
Fire and
first.
Stone, Life and Death. Okay. So this is a crossover, which is funny because we're bringing back Alien after the terrible AvP films, right? So we're going to do, the next thing we do is going to be this enormous AvP crossover with Prometheus. That's going to be Alien, Predator, Prometheus, and AvP. And it's going to play with the black goo a lot. I know this isn't brought up as much anymore, but this series certainly did that, in that the black goo affected the environment of the planet. We started seeing vegetation growth there. We started seeing all these alien-esque looking wildlife. And the black goo also affected synthetics in that story. It turned the synthetic character. I know you like to split hairs here, Aaron, and be like, "Oh, well, he was a different kind of biological."
Well, no. That's my problem with that fucking run, is that it doesn't adequately explain that. But keep going. Sorry.
Okay, so the synthetic turns into a space jockey-esque, alien-esque being. It's kind of interesting. We find out the Deacon turned into a mountain for some reason, a living mountain. So that goes wild with the black goo. And then later, Fireteam Elite shows that the aliens, well, this was shown a bit in those comics too. The aliens get mutated in those comics. They make this comment about the queen, how it's affected her and she's outgrown her enclosure or something. But more blatantly, we see it in Fireteam Elite, where they say, well, these neomorphic enemies are the xenomorphs that have been infected with the black goo, which gets Aaron upset. Alex has a different take, where in your story, you're like, okay, the xenomorphs are immune to the black goo. Like Blue wades through it essentially without any consequence.
Yeah, that's definitely where I still fall, by the way.
There's a reason, Alex, that you have two of my favorite entries of Alien media.
It's not just because I gave you the best death of all time in that book.
I mean, it was pretty fucking brutal.
I know. I wrote that and I was like, I'm giving him way too much.
I always say it felt like Charybdis was written for me.
To a certain extent, it was.
Yes.
You were part of the focus group. I mean, like, I took your feedback very seriously, and I clearly forgot to mention that more people were dragged away in the Haroon scene, and that was where I got docked points. But other than that,
I'll never live that down, and you'll never live that down, will they? Will we?
No. It's acrimony between us forever. You know, I love you. It's fine.
I love you.
So let me just say, part of the problem with the aftermath of Prometheus coming out was that Dark Horse and Titan at that time were the two, expanded universe publishers really going full bore, felt the need to put black goo into what they were doing immediately. We hadn't even, I don't think that the Prometheus had even come out on Blu-ray or DVD or whatever it was back then, when that huge crossover event started, because the Prometheus portion of that comic book is so clearly editorially changed before it was published, because they're still wearing the exact same style of suits as in the film Prometheus, but they had to move it 40 years into the future or something ridiculous.
It was originally, it's near enough 100 years, something like that.
No,
they were originally supposed to be deacons,
30 years, yeah. So there wasn't supposed to be aliens in it. They were supposed to be deacons.
Yeah, man. And even Aliens Colonial Marines, the video game, puts in if you shoot the space jockey's head, you get to watch a little mini movie of the space jockey ship and the flying saucer ship from the beginning of Prometheus having a dogfight.
It's actually
not even that.
It's the telescope turned upside down, and that's it.
It's the platform turned upside down.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm very disappointed. I thought it was the cool thing. Okay, but my point is,
you're disappointed in Colonial Marines? No one's ever had that.
No. Oh, I just wanted the UFO ship to have some other appearance somewhere in the expanded universe. But everyone jumped to trying to include this stuff because that's what the new Alien was. This is what we're supposed to be doing. But no one had any guidelines, and no one had any idea for a while what to make of it all. The dust hadn't settled. And so anytime you make a continuation of a story, you're going to force a little bit of retconning in when someone reads it. Ideas they had from the first book or movie or whatever have to change a little bit. And you should always be operating from a place of, do no harm. Don't disrupt things. I think that the Star Wars films are notorious for absolutely every single entry retcons a major piece of the previous entries. Like suddenly Darth Vader is his father. Suddenly Luke is his sister. Suddenly Darth Vader was a little kid named Annie, and there's midichlorians, all that kind of stuff. The Alien films had been going pretty smoothly, I would argue. Aliens obviously retcons that now Ripley has a daughter had a daughter out there. The aliens were much more bug-like, whatever you want to say, but it was working, right? And so for Prometheus to come in and tell you what you saw in 1979's Alien isn't what it was. You saw wrong. This is the new version. They're only 13 feet tall. And by the way, it's a spacesuit, and on and on, all of these things. It was just such a strange place to come at it. Yeah, there's just things going on in these prequels that are such a huge shift from what we had previously that I think the audience wasn't on board with it yet. And so when the expanded media immediately jumped whole hog on Prometheus ideas, personally, I pulled way back. It's like, I don't want that. And I feel like it's only within the last couple of years with things like Dark Descent and a couple of novels going back to just straight aliens style storytelling and not messing with the black goo, that I've gotten a lot more comfortable. The idea that what I like can continue to exist in this universe, and so the black goo stuff isn't a bad thing. It just can't be in every single book or
Yeah,
every single game.
you bring up something that I think you and I are both on the same page with, Christian. And honestly, it started as soon as Alien Isolation, right? This came out 2 years after Prometheus. Does not include any prequel elements at all. Come on. I mean,
Well, it was in development. It would
What?
have also been in development for like 4 years at that point.
yeah,
So like,
So, there's that. But point is, we still see projects now like Isolation, like more recently Dark Descent, which Dark Descent did wildly different things. I know for reasons they say like, oh, we're not contradicting anything, but come on, yes you are. So that was interesting because it felt more like old EU. And that was one of the reasons why I was really cheering on Blomkamp's Alien 5. I mean, say what you will from what some people have said about that and how bad it could have been. But for better or worse, I was like, at this point, canon's too convoluted. We just need like a Terminator thing where there's different continuities and stuff. Maybe I was wrong on that. Maybe that would have been the bad way to go. Even worse.
If Aliens goes multiversal, I'm out.
Well, okay, so multiverse in the sense that like that should never be part of the story, right? Which it almost was at the end of The Predator, unfortunately. But that should never, like, there's a difference between like AvP is an alternate canon, right? There's not like, I mean, unless we're going by Alien versus Avengers, Aaron, where it does establish a multiverse, which it does.
It's a shame because that run is actually pretty fucking good. And
Really?
Look, it's right up there with Predator versus Batman.
Hey, no, that is good. That is good. Hold on.
Yeah, I love Predator versus Batman. What are you talking about?
Okay.
I didn't know there was another one.
If you haven't read it, Christian, I am serious. That run is actually pretty good so far. 2 issues in.
2 issues. Okay.
But as someone like, when I was excited for Covenant, I was like, okay, I accept Prometheus. Like, Covenant looks really cool. Let's get into this. And then that is a whole other thing too. But I still watch those 2 movies more than you think. I bought a Covenant t-shirt, guys. Like, so I don't like fully hate it with all of my being. Like, I still have things about those movies I love, and I do like to see stories like yours, Alex, like Fireteam Elite, that play around with that and do it successfully. But at the same time, I do want alien stories, like with Isolation 2. I don't want them to get into prequel stuff. Like, I want something that feels more in line with Isolation 1, that feels more like core old Alien universe, you know?
And that is an entirely fair point, you know. But, and I'm not defending it, but this isn't a problem that was exclusive to the Alien franchise. You know, this is a franchise media thing. You know, when Abrams rebooted Trek, it were 3 planned novels in the new fucking JJ verse. What do they call it? Kelvin verse.
Mhm.
It was a new run in that universe. It's just a thing in multimedia.
That is the money grab of the publishers.
Yeah, and it's
okay, like that's all that is.
It's tying into the current thing, but it is not a problem exclusive to our little fandom corner. I mean, it's an entirely fair point, Christian. You know, they did do it, but it's also frustrating. I don't hate. That's the wrong word. Fire and Stone frustrates me in the same way that Prometheus frustrates me, because it's not internally consistent, and it doesn't explain how what it's doing is working. It's just fucking doing it, and no more so is that embodied in that run than Eldon. As a concept, I fucking love the idea of him, and I think from a visual point of view, he looks awesome. From a conceptual point of view, it's awesome. But the comic can't decide what he is. You know, the Prometheus run
is Eldon the droid that becomes an
yes,
alien?
yes.
Okay.
So early on in the Prometheus part of that, it goes, "Oh, we've got constructs and synthetics on board," as if they're 2 different things. and then it labels Eldon a construct instead of a synthetic, which is what we know alien characters as, alien androids as. And then it decides it's going to mutate him. But they're not biological. Okay, so are you telling me that this will affect non-biological things? And it doesn't explain that throughout. And then it has the aliens being affected by the goo. It melds. I mean, this isn't even really affected by the goo as such. It's not like it's mutating the aliens into fucking neomorph. I fucking hate that in Fireteam Elite so much. But it sticks a bloke and an alien together. That is how the black goo affects the aliens in that run. And then we
the
get
queen
to
thing. They still maintain.
yeah,
that
and
they were
the
saying
queen
something.
thing, it turns her into some giant immovable blob of some variety. And then we get to Fireteam Elite, and it turns them into neomorphs.
So one question though for Alex. Alex, if a person could get a sample of whatever the black goo is from the opening scene of Prometheus, right?
Mm-hmm.
That and you administered that to an alien, that would have a similar effect to them, right?
I mean, potentially. I'm not gonna. I wouldn't say no on that one. Because it does sort of make sense to me that if I mean they're still cellular creatures. They're still assembled from the biology of whatever they've consumed. It's not like they're like silicate life forms or something like that. Which would of course explain the gain of biomass as well if you wanted to go for that weird route. But like I mean, like I could see doing that. Um, Once again, I think that the problem with all these gooey stories is that they focus on the MacGuffin. They focus on explaining the canon and trying to bring some sense and science to it when, that's really not the point. The
Right.
point the point of Alien is that your boss would lock you in a closet full of dick skeletons for $5. And not even $5 he gets to keep. That's the point of Alien. The point of Alien, whenever somebody's like, "Oh, what's the problem with the prequels?" It's not the black goo. It's that Ridley Scott stopped fucking with anti-capitalism.
I think we need to have you on our dystopianism in the alien universe episode.
It drives me crazy when they're like, "This is a story about intrepid explorers." I'm like, checked out at the beginning, and I'm just, like sometimes I watch these things just for homework, you know, and it's just because it's like, what other standard am I going to be held to? Then why do I collect the Apocrypha? It didn't even make it into the film. I'll tell you why, because somebody's going to be like, "Oh, this is something that you fucked up," right? That's it. And let me tell you, as soon as they're like, "Oh, you can ignore the Dark Horse comics," I'm like, great. I may have grown up on those, but they're all gone out of my head. um I Stories are not about goo. Stories are not about the xenomorph, even. The xenomorph is, in my stories, a natural event. It is like a tsunami or being attacked by a bunch of tigers. It's not like, oh, what drives the tigers? Where do tigers come from? I don't. Like, we know these things. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what we do to each other over it. And that's what I'm always interested in. That's where my stories always come in, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not afraid to write with that stuff, because it for me, it's gonna it's just gonna be about the characters. And to take it back to Rogue Incursion, we talked about this a little bit before the call. That's not a story about aliens. That's a story about two best friends inside the Alien franchise. And as far as I know, there aren't a lot of two best friend stories inside the Alien franchise, aside from obviously the comics from which the character comes. You know, and when they were like, and they said, we want to make sure this is canonical to those comics, and I was like, why though? The last two graphic novels are out of print, and the creator is disgraced, and rightfully so. And, especially with the Neil Gaiman article that came out yesterday, that's heavily on my mind, right? I'm not interested in rehabilitating somebody's reputation, you know? And so when it came time, it was like, let's make these characters ours and let's focus on the relationship between them and developing their friendship as a believable, interesting dynamic. You know, the grief of being able to see your friend going through something and not be able to truly help in both instances, both directions, that's beautiful. That's the kind of stuff stories are about. The kind of stuff stories are not about is what would the black goo do in this scenario versus that scenario. Internal consistency matters, right? You must be able to use filmic language to give the audience consequences they can predict. And I think this whole podcast has been about the fact that the filmic language and the comic language did not give us consequences we could predict. We're all arguing about what it could mean, right? But what it really comes down to is that's a failure of consistency and a failure of simplicity and a failure of clarity.
Yeah, definitely.
And the characters were so we were so divorced from the characters and what they were going through that my mind was spent thinking about these things instead of being worried for them.
Right.
I didn't care about them. You know, they're taking their helmets off. They're being idiots. What's that thing over there in the corner? What's happening over there? How does this work? You know, if I were engaged, these inconsistencies wouldn't matter probably. I wouldn't even be thinking about that until much later on.
Well, that's just a thing as well in general, isn't it? You know, if you are, like Christian said, engaged, if you are enjoying the experience that you are having at the minute, you know, your focus isn't on the background elements, it isn't on the minutiae, then you don't get distracted by it, and then it doesn't ruin your experience. Because I mean, it's an age-old thing, isn't it? If you are not enjoying what's on there, you start to nitpick. You start to notice details that wind you up, and then it snowballs and ruins the entire experience.
The first time I watched Romulus, I came out of there like A+. That was awesome. I loved it. I loved every minute of it, and it was mostly because got to hear two of my words on the silver screen. You know? but 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 when but what really got me was the relationship between Andy and Rain, and the way that as a parent of a disabled child, severely disabled child, the exploration of capitalism interrupts the relationship between caregiver and receiver is beautiful. It's so good. I mean, I wish that androids weren't always used to stand in for autistic characters, but here we are. Um, but for me, that relationship really drove me through that film. And it was only when I came back around later that I was like, there's some real weird decisions here, sort of continuity wise. Like, I don't understand, why didn't the people who work for the company know about Renaissance Station being in orbit? It's large enough that you should be able to see it. It's like, no, some children with a mining hauler found it. Okay, why did children have a mining hauler?
Because of the black goo. That's why.
Yeah. And I mean, when they, and then again, when they involved the black goo and Romulus, that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, you actually did it right. You made it about the health of the colonists. You made it
Exactly.
about, we have to do this or else we'll never make it as a spacefaring species.
It was about the exploitation of the colonists. Deep down.
When I say
Yeah.
health of, I mean like continued production by.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
At the same time, we haven't gone into Romulus much here, but that was a moment where even Andy, even though he has a different agenda, where he's like, "Oh, it worked on the rat." I'm like, "Yeah, you saw the rat. It was right there. It was this giant monster thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it was literally right next to the terminal you were at. You guys all missed that? Like,
I don't think he did, actually. I think it was another one of those, like, let's inject and see what happens kind of situation. Like, his orders were, let's see what happens. I would love to inject a baby with this.
it seems like, I wonder if Kay would have survived had the offspring not killed her. I mean, she's
So
it's implied that she's lactating, something, so she's infected. So
Yeah.
it's like, what would have happened to her had it not pretty much bled her dry at that point?
Well,
the ending of that movie is so fascinating because it would be busy work to show us the cleanup that would need to happen inside that ship for anyone to want to travel, right? But they're not going to show us ejecting the bodies, scrubbing the floor, throwing away those ampules or those little injector things. But by not showing us that, we are so primed for a sequel. We have the potential for a zombie mutant K. We have a whole bunch more of the injectable serums. I mean, it's insane what's inside that ship. She has put herself into a cryotube in a biological nightmare, right? And it's just going to cook on by. Plus, how strange is it in that film? The implication is if someone who is in cryo goes into distress, they get kicked out of cryo, right? That's what happens. She's all set to go into cryo herself, and then the cryotube is opening. What? Why would that be a thing? Why is that a thing? It just occurred to me just now. Like,
I think it was because like the cryo is a process and they don't freeze like instantly, and it was during the process that her heart rate started spiking. Like, I have to imagine if the cryo process had already completed before she was like that was happening to her, then she would have been preserved. And that
Right, you can't go into distress if you're fully frozen. Is your sort of point there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But is there anything better for distress than sedation in this case? Like,
and that is how the Alien franchise tends to use or the EU, I suppose, tends to try and use the pods.
It's what oh my god, back in Alien, Yaphet Kotto's character.
Why don't you just freeze him?
Why don't we, exactly?
And in Resurrection as well, like they bring that up. We got to get you to the freezer. Like,
yeah. Speaking of Resurrection, did you guys see the artwork of how Ripley 8 was supposed to have scars on her back where
I posted it.
Aaron, did you see the artwork that you posted? That made me so happy. That made me so happy because
it wasn't artwork. It was actually they did the prosthetics and put it on. It's in the film. You just don't see it.
That's such a waste. It's a beautiful, beautiful image. It still doesn't explain why they would save that Ripley and let her, run around when they have the other ones alive. I mean, they make a big deal of not killing her. Like, well, you didn't kill number 7. It's still sitting on a tray there.
Yeah, true. Aware of people needing to leave, I just want to quickly mention the thing that finally reconciled the Goo for me. And it was a recent thing I'd thought about. So Advent, the short film that came out depicting David recording his messages, sending Weyland-Yutani instructions on how to design their own alien. He says, or he likens it to a radical form of artificial intelligence, the Black Goo. And then the current phase of that technology that we're in now, the absolute random bullshit that AI will throw out at you in terms of imagery, in terms of written word.
You're like spot on.
I was like, you know what? Sure, that works, because if it's just got this input and each time it throws out this variation of its input, I was like, yeah, okay, fuck it. Yeah, that's how AI works for us. Sure, that's how the Black Goo's reacting. So that is
who wrote that? Who wrote Advent?
I know this. Hang on. Talk amongst yourselves and I will tell you.
Well, I know. Yeah, that's a good question. But I will say, just another random tangent here, with Ridley Scott's son, Luke Scott, having directed a lot of the Covenant viral stuff, I still would like to see an Alien movie by him. I thought he did a good job on a lot of this. I think he did some of the stuff for Prometheus as well.
I think so too.
But he didn't do Advent. I know that was another. Oh, did he do Advent as well?
He directed Advent. It was written by a chap called Will Melton, who co-wrote, who wrote Last Supper, who co-wrote Meet Walter, and a bunch of other viral pieces for Ridley Scott Productions.
Oh, okay.
So, because I have to leave in 10 minutes, I want to close with my thoughts, which are, I'm one of those fans that actually doesn't even like the DNA reflex. I'm all about the aux. I'm all about, this is just what the alien does in this particular circumstance. That's a rare case of, it's a queen face hugger that can lay both the queen embryo. I'm sorry, Alex, and a protector alien that does this. For some reason, kills everyone that should have been, cocooned for host. But anyway, because as soon as you introduce the DNA reflex, which is just it's just a misunderstanding in my opinion of Alien 3, everyone then is like, oh, what if it was with a bear? What if it was with a boar? What if it was with an octopus? And you've lost the humanity at the core of the story. You're now talking about what cool combination can we apply for our next project? Okay, so seeing the world
I mean,
through
you're
my
shitting
lens.
on my childhood. It's fine. It's fine.
I'm so sorry.
It's
Kenner toys. Come on, Christian.
Yeah,
I
those
never-
comics were dope.
I never got into it. But listen, so if you can imagine, I'm already intolerant to that kind of expansion of what the alien is. The Black Goo in Prometheus is a nightmare for me, because now we're taking what for me is the perfect organism designed by Giger, and you're making John Carpenter's The Thing. But we already have John Carpenter's The Thing. We don't need an invasive alien that can take any form that it wants and do anything that it needs to do to survive. We have that, and it's beautiful. I want the alien, and I know that there are a couple of quotes from Ridley Scott supposedly saying back in 78, 79,
If it
that
came
the
from
alien,
the cat, it'd have looked like the cat, or
right?
something to that effect.
So I know that it walks on two legs because Cain was the father. I know that that's the thinking, but Prometheus's Black Goo implies the alien could be any possible shape, any combination of elements. And every time people do that, and you see this in the unfilmed part of Covenant, then they have to fight. The two different kinds of aliens have to fight each other. And we're back to smashing action figures together. And that's what I never, ever want for this series of stories. That's my soapbox.
I will agree with some of that. I think you and I are on the same page in that. For me, it's kind of like, I love Resident Evil, but to me, the Black Goo kind of turns Alien to Resident Evil, and Alien has not been Resident Evil for me, where things you eject them and they'll mutate like crazy or whatever. Like Alien, to me, the allure comes from the mystery. I do like the DNA reflex, though. I'm like, show me more horse xenomorphs like we saw in Ultimate Prey. That sounds fun. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like it turns the alien into a virus for me, which I never saw it as that. That's my own personal view. People love the prequels. And again, like there's stories built from those and elements of those themselves that I can really get on board with
Not
and
any
watch
good
and
ones.
appreciate. No, like legit good ones. Yours being
I'm joking. I'm
the
joking.
top of them, like for real. So at the end of the day, it'll always just remain this very frustrating element that I have to deal with in a lot of alien media. But sometimes it surprises me and I end up quite enjoying it, as was the case with your stories. So thank you for that.
And Inferno's Fall. I know that Aaron has his issues. I actually really enjoyed that story, mostly because it took things that I found objectionable in the movie. It's like, but in this context, I'm like, oh, okay, I can get on board with this. It's well written, it's engaging. And this conversation, the three of you talking about this, I'm really reinterpreting some of my long-held biases against the Black Goo. And actually, I'm looking forward to listening back to this because I've forgotten some of the things that Alex was talking about in particular. You said some good stuff in here, my friend. So
Thank you. I appreciate it. If I think Aaron should get to close this out since he's since he's one of our hosts here. But for me, my final word on the Black Goo is that it is a useful narrative tool and nothing more. I need it to be internally consistent. I need it to be a part and parcel for whatever conspiracy I need to hatch. But if I don't need it, for example, in Rogue Incursion, I'm not going to pull it out because nobody's going to be like, oh, where did these come from? They're all dead. They can't tell you, So, yeah, that's for me, it is a tool. And I didn't think that Prometheus broke a bunch of ground for me. I don't think it ruined anything for me. I think when I watched it, I went, oh, God, I wish I could use that excuse. Right. And then I did, and it was great. And people will say, like, oh, you had a Black Goose story. And yeah, I expanded it a lot. I feel like using it for medical reasons, for beneficial reasons, was a place that I hadn't really seen a lot of the media take it.
And that was one of the big reasons I really enjoyed what you did with the Cold Forge.
And that was one of the reasons I enjoyed Romulus. Hey.
I will go to bat for that film any day of the week.
I
it-
liked Romulus. I'm not shitting
Yeah.
on Romulus.
No, I mean, same as Alien 3 for me. There are things I would have done different, but I fucking love
Right.
Romulus. I genuinely love
Same.
Romulus.
Same.
And as soon as Plagiaries Prepotence came up, I was like, I just wanted to whip the phone straight out and message you.
Like the
I
alien
found
guy.
out
Yeah.
in the theater. I was
That's
in like
amazing.
kind of a crappy theater too, and I was just like, people didn't understand why I was just flipping out in the audience. Because like there are all these gasp lines and clap lines and all this other stuff, and like, but then he says plagiaris prepotens, and I was like,
Oh,
Oh, you didn't notice Manu
Manu
Malo,
Malo
though,
and
did you?
Naxodria?
Yeah, I had to
Somebody
tell
had
you
to
that
show
one.
it to me. Yeah, I think it was you.
I told you.
Yeah. Then I was like, oh shit. Yeah, they really did pay attention. So
So, Black Goo. It still frustrates me because the entries are not consistent with each other.
yeah.
You know, the Fire and Stone isn't consistent with what you do. Fire Team Elite isn't consistent with them what you do. I suppose I should have worded that differently, as in you following Fire and Stone. But whatever. The point is, I still don't believe there to be any consistency throughout the entire run of the franchise. There are interpretations of it that I prefer, yours being the main one. And to some extent, there are excuses that I later headcanon to work. You know, the idea of the programmability of it, the idea of different strains, which is what we've started to embrace a lot more in. Again, I go to the RPG as this big thing, lore thing, but that's in there. So it doesn't piss me off as much anymore. It still frustrates me in a way, because with Fire Team Elite coming out after you and then not doing your interpretation of it, I was like, okay, we're doing this again. But there are headcanon ways to satisfy ourselves. And I think that's the important thing at the end of the day. Our interpretations do mean a lot to us. And Christian, you said something on a PO episode about the Black Goo a long time ago, how it inherits the cosmic horror aspects of the alien. So David being the creator of the alien, you know, the Black Goo inherits that Lovecraftian vibe of it by being the ancient version of it, because it all comes from that. And so that's another part where I'm like, okay, we still save the vibes. I still don't have to hate the thing as being a recent creation. I don't think it will ever be a satisfying addition to the lore because of that inconsistency throughout everything. Even with the films, because the films are the worst offenders of it. But
haven't they always been to a certain extent like that? I mean, from the minute AvP came out, it
oh boy.
changed the entire timeline. The alien canon is just whatever the majority of fans decide it is. It is so sloppy compared to Star Wars or anything like that. And then you throw in the EU and it's even wilder.
It's a popularist thing. And I think that applies to, again, it's not an alien thing. It's a franchise thing. It's a multimedia thing. What the studios, what the companies think the fans are more interested in and will buy more of, that's what we'll get. And so be it. But anyway, I think we all need to go. So, Christian, is there anywhere you want people to go to? Are you on any media now to look at your current projects now?
Oh, if you go to Instagram and look for Propping Up the Mythos, all one word, that is where I post lots of weird stuff, but in particular, my long-running Necronomicon book project. So you can check that out.
Alex, where are you at these days?
So you can find me at alexrwhite.com. You can also find me on Instagram as AlexWhiteWriter. As you all know, I'm sure, Alien Rogue Incursion is my most recent release, December of last year. But also that month came out Ardent Violet and the Infinite Eye, which was the second book in my Star Metal Symphony trilogy. And I would love for your listeners to give that a try if you like David Bowie and Evangelion. It's a lot different. It's a lot different from Alien, but check it out.
Indeed. And I won't bother with that. You know where we are, avpgalaxy.net. You'll find all our shit on there. But thank you to Christian. Thank you to Alex for joining us today. And
Gladly.
thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to all our listeners and watchers. This has been Corporal Hicks.
RidgeTop.
Christian.
Oh, I'm Alex. We didn't get like an order.
It's the order I introduced you in at the start.
Oh
of the
shit!
episode.
Sorry,
I don't remember that.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
This was
you.
fun.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us, folks.